So, the first part of it is, in the ecological time scale, do herbivores prevent plants from living in different environments? It sets up the prediction that if you somehow remove herbivores from the equation, that you could actually see this invasion of low resource habitats by high resource species. And the second part of the prediction is just that if you look at a phylogeny of species that live in a variety of habitats, that you might find close relatives living in different habitats, and they would have traits that are related to defense and growth rate that would be really predictable and show this trade-off. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is a system that I'm studying this question, which is in what are called white sand forests in the Amazon basin. I'm going to show you lots of pictures of white sand forests and why they're a cool system to study trade-offs. I'll tell you a little bit about a reciprocal transplant I did to plant in one habitat, another habitat, and remove herbivores and see what happens. And then I'm going to change to more of the evolutionary time scale and tell you about a group of trees that's almost as cool as Dichotria. They're called Proteum in the Burseraceae, that live in a lot of different habitats, and some of the work that we're doing to try to understand habitat specialization in that group, and the role of herbivores. And so we'll see how far I get. So this is a satellite image of where I do a lot of my research. This is the city of Iquitos. About 500,000 people live here. Its claim to fame is it's the largest city on any continent that you can't get to by road. So you can either fly here or you can take the river. This is the Amazon River. There are a lot of boats going to different cities in other parts of the Amazon. So this is the city, and this is a smaller river called the Nanay. Does everyone see these little patches here? The brown color surrounded by olive. Those are white sand forests surrounded by kind of clay and brown sand soils that are much higher fertility. And let me show you what they look like first. Yeah, this is what they look like when they're cut down. It's just like white beach sand. People can't really use this forest for much, but the sand is really good for cement, so construction. So people do like that. But it's just pure white sand, like you're on a white sand beach. When they're not cut down, they're also really, really obvious from the air because the canopy is so much shorter. It's a low resource soil, some of the lowest resource soils, lowest fertility soils in the world. And so you get stunted trees, stunted canopy. And then here's a kind of more normal rainforest. How many people have been to a rainforest? Okay. So rainforests are, typically have these big trees. It's really dark understory, lots of vines and palm trees and orchids and bromeliads and snakes and things like that, right? Okay, that's over here. And then here, you have a very different environment with a tree canopy that could be just a little bit higher than my hand here and a really dense stands, and you'll see more pictures. So where did these white sands come from? So you can see that there's quite a lot of these patches, just like those aerial images that I saw. And they kind of look like they're been deposited by a larger paleo river that was kind of similar to this one. And what people think is that we've got to get back into the geological history of South America a little bit. So if you go back in time 20 or 30 million years ago, South America was a lot like Australia is today, where not a lot of tectonic activity, not a lot of recent collisions, no volcanic activity, just kind of a really large area that had been rained on for hundreds of millions of years, so a lot of poor soils. The more it just rains on a continent, all the nutrients kind of just wash away, and eventually you just get a really sandy area. And that was most of South America, still is most of South America today. But about 30 million years ago, you get a collision here, the Nazca plate with the South American plate, and the Andes start rising in the south and propagating north. And basically, this changes everything for the western Amazon, because there used to be one river that kind of went this way, came out around Guayaquil, Ecuador, and another river that kind of went up towards Magdalena Valley in Colombia. Well, as soon as you have Andes coming here and stops those rivers from forming, the water's got nowhere to go, right? So there ended up being this kind of big lake, Pavas, and then eventually it turns around and starts flowing this way to the current Amazon, which is the world's largest river, has the most flow. I think it goes out like fresh. You can drink fresh water like out here in the Atlantic Ocean. That's how much water comes out of the Amazon. Okay. So what else happened when this Andes come in? Well, you get recent sediments that are being lifted up and then being rained on. And so you have this much newer soil that's being laid down at the base of the Andes here. And then there was a kind of a marine incursion that came in here, and you had really productive algae growing there, and mangroves, and really productive habitats. And so that really changed the soil fertility in the western Amazon. Now, there's like this fertile crescent here in the Amazon where you have kind of pretty fertile soils next to these really ancient white sand deposits that were hundreds of millions old, pre-Cambrian sediments. And in the western Amazon, really cool because you can find those habitats right next to one another. So here's a picture of Loreto, Peru, and I was just telling you about Iquitos. That's where I was showing that satellite image. These orange areas are areas where these ancient white sand deposits are, and they're all surrounded by this really fertile red clay. Okay, so those are the pictures, and this is what it looks like in the interior of some of these white sand forests. This one, maybe about 25-foot canopy. You can see there's a lot of light in the understory. The trees are not very large. There's no big buttress trees. Very few vines and lianas. It's a different look to it than a typical rainforest. And they're really small patches of forest, these white sand islands. They're just a couple square kilometers, sometimes smaller. And they, all told, they cover about 3% of the Amazon basin. As I said, some of the lowest soil fertility measured is just pure white quartz, which is really, really low. Nothing can stick to it. So that's why soils are fertile, right? You have these cations that stick to the colloids in the clay, and the plants can uptake it. And so it turns out that because of the stressful environment, you get a lot of endemic species on these white sand forests. So that means species that are found in the white sands are not found in any other place in the world. And there's probably a few unfortunate people in the audience who are interested in animals and not in plants. And so here's my slide for you guys. And there are also specialists that are animals to this environment. So I have a friend named Dr. Alvarez, who's an awesome ornithologist, and he's identified 6 species that are new to science, just a few kilometers away from a city of 500,000. And if you know anything about the bird world, people are crazy for birds. And it's really a big deal to find one species that's new to science and name it. And he's found 6. And those have all been specialists to these environments, these very specialized, different environments with different plants. Back to my comfort zone plants. This is a bromeliad in the pineapple family growing on the ground. So lots of plants that you expect growing in the canopy of tropical rainforests are found in the ground in white sand forests, maybe because the canopy is so short and there's so much light that gets to the understory. You find orchids on the ground too. Very often. This is one of my favorite slides. Oh, look, he's wearing an Oakland A's hat. Go A's. I'll be home before the game starts. All right. This is Italo Mesones, my partner in crime. He lives in Iquitos, Peru. We've been working together for about, since '99, so a while. And the sign here in Spanish says, "Deposit your chicken poop here." And it's next to a trashed white sand forest. And I always laugh. I show this slide because I don't know whether it's like the owner's misguided attempt to, after he trashed his forest, that if people brought enough chicken poop, you could throw it on there and then you could grow vegetables or something. But it wouldn't work because the first time it rains, it rains really hard in the Peruvian Amazon. All those nutrients are just going to wash right through the quartz soils. So the reason I show this is because white sand forests are super fragile. There's no reason to cut them down. You can't grow pineapples on them. You can't grow yucca, and you can't grow anything on these forests. And nothing's going to grow back. This is going to probably take thousands of years for a forest to regenerate after you cut it down because all the nutrients are locked up in the living tissue. So we should just preserve them. They're interesting places, and I'll convince you by that by the end. Okay, so the first thing I did was I wanted to see whether you have these really weird soils, really nutrient poor, next to pretty relatively rich clay soils. I wanted to see whether the specialists that live in one soil type live in the other soil type. And then I read a paper when I was in graduate school that said they can't live. There's some different pH content, different ions, and they just die. So I was curious to see whether that was true. So I took 20 species and I planted them in these little exclosures. Some of them protected against herbivores and some of them open with these roofs on the top to keep the lighting the same. And I had 11 of these in white sand forest and 11 of these in clay soil forest.